So we're recording. And I'm going to let folks in from the waiting room.
Is everyone in, Crystal? Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel on policy, capacity building, and environmental justice enforcement. My name is Stephanie Lewis, and I work at the Department of Toxic Substances Control. I will briefly turn it over to Leah for translation instructions, and then today's panel will begin. Leah?
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Lía. Perdón, primero lo que acaba de decir Stephanie. Muy buenas tardes. Soy Stephanie y estamos aquí en el panel de las políticas, las capacidades y la aplicación de la ley. Soy Stephanie Lewis y ahora le vamos a dar la palabra a las intérpretes para que nos expliquen cómo funciona. Entonces, hola, muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Lía. Estoy aquí con mi compañera Nicola y vamos a ser sus intérpretes entre inglés y español el día de hoy.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Leah. I'm with my co-interpreter, Nicola, and we will be interpreting between English and Spanish for this activity.
Y la interpretación es para cualquier persona que no esté cómoda en los dos idiomas, español y inglés, que es lo que tenemos capacidad el día de hoy. Entonces, ahorita les vamos a explicar cómo pueden unirse a su canal de idioma preferido.
So again, the interpretation is between English and Spanish. That is what we have the capacity to support with today, and we will tell you in just one moment how to tune into your preferred language channel to listen to this presentation.
Entonces ya está activada la interpretación o la herramienta. Entonces, si está uniéndose por una computadora, verá un icono de un mundo, un mapa mundi en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom y dice Interpretation, interpretación. Ahí le da clic y puede escoger inglés o español.
So the Zoom interpretation tool has been activated. If you are joining us using your computer or laptop, you will see a globe icon at the very bottom of your Zoom screen. This button will say interpretation. You will click on that and then select your preferred English or language channel, either English or Spanish.
Y si nos acompaña por tableta o teléfono inteligente, entonces es diferente. Hay que presionar suavemente la pantalla. Va a aparecer un botón que con 3 puntitos blancos dice más, more. Ahí le da clic en más y luego aparece otro menú le da clic en interpretación de idiomas, Language Interpretation. Ahí le da clic en el idioma preferido, español o inglés, y luego finalizar o confirmar.
If you are, however, joining us using a tablet or a smartphone, the process is a little bit different. What you're going to do is you'll touch the screen of your device. You will see 3 dots appear that say more. Click on that. Then a menu will appear that says interpretation. Click interpretation, select English or Spanish, and then click confirm or OK.
Entonces ahora pueden escoger su canal. Cualquier problema que tengan, por favor, no tengan pena, nos avisan en el chat y le podemos ayudar. And so please switch to your channel now. We're going to do a few moments of simultaneous interpreting. And please, no worries. If you have any problem with the interpreting, let us know in the chat and we'll be able to help you. Entonces ahora deben de estar en su canal de idioma y deben de poder escuchar a la intérprete en el canal de inglés. Y nada más, entonces, unos recordatorios para nuestros panelistas, por favor. Se les pide que hable despacio. Si pueden estar pendiente a nuestras cajitas aquí en Zoom, el intérprete a lo mejor va a hacer este señal que es para hablar más despacio. Y también otros problemas que tenemos los vamos a avisarles en el chat. Entonces, por favor, estén pendientes a las comunicaciones. Y nada más, muchísimas gracias y nos da mucho gusto apoyar este espacio multilingüe y bilingüe. Y ahora le paso la palabra de nuevo a Stephanie.
Thank you, Leah. Nicola. Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network, commonly referred to as LAEJN, was formed by frontline environmental justice communities and advocates over 16 years ago. As a longtime community advocate myself, I have been involved with LAEJN since 2016, representing DTSC. The Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network meets monthly to mentor and help each other with common issues, as well as ones specific to the communities they engage with. They have worked collaboratively on toxic tours, ground truthing projects, rulemaking at several different agencies, policy and legislative issues, as well as these environmental enforcement symposiums, this one being their 7th annual. The Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network has a dynamic partnership with regulators, academics, state, local, and federal agencies, and many environmental justice communities. They seek participation from individuals who are acting change agents for environmental justice in the agencies they work in. They have a special focus towards problem solving around many of the issues we have been working on for decades. By applying boots on the ground and knowledge to agency policy goals, they hope to help create a better balance that will lead us collaboratively to equitable justice for communities. They know it is critical to create spaces as they work to explore and understand different perspectives and approaches to protecting EJ communities. Their collective work is deeply rooted by a desire to do what is needed to improve the quality of life in environmentally impacted communities. A special thank you to the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network planning team, who have been a tremendous help in shaping 8 panels presentations and continues to meet every 2 weeks as we complete this year's series. Jessica Brown and Rosa Borelli with the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, Mandy Brown, the Los Angeles Department of Public Health, Manuel Garcia and Christopher Curtis, the Los Angeles County District Attorney, Rubina Suwol, California Safe Schools, Crystal Love Lazard, Ryan Atencio, and Deldy Reyes with the California Air Resources Board, Joe Liu with the Coalition for Clean Air, Cynthia Babbage and Florence Gharibian, the Del Amo Action Committee, Jennifer Malone, Los Angeles County General Counsel, Kristen McKinley with the California Environmental Protection Agency, Maria Salinas with Cal Recycle, Martha Sanchez with the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, and Susanna Lagudis with the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, and myself. It is important to thank our co-sponsors for their support for this year's series of virtual discussions around environmental justice and enforcement. They are the California Air Resources Board, Cal Recycle, Los Angeles City Attorney, South Coast Air Quality Management District, Earth Justice, Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, Supervisor Hilda Solis, and Supervisor Janice Hahn, and our hosts, the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network, who welcomes you to this space. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jessica Brown, who will be the moderator for today's panel. Jessica?
Thank you, Stephanie. And hello to everyone. I first want to say it is my sincere honor to be involved with this group and this team of folks, both community and government. And this panel especially, I'm very excited about it, and really fantastic folks. So first, let me just give you a little bit about the panel. This panel will discuss the need to think of collaboration and engagement differently, and the importance of ensuring environmental justice plans and policies include a process for implementation and enforcement. We recognize the need to build agency and community capacity if we are all to promote meaningful engagement. We will reflect on how we move forward in our collective efforts to protect environmental justice communities. I'm going to pause for just 1 minute and remind folks who are attending the panel to please put yourselves on mute. There will be an opportunity to speak or raise your hand or ask questions, but with this many people on the line, if you mute yourself while you're not speaking, that really helps for efficiency and allows people to be heard. So I want to introduce our panel. This is an amazing group of folks who I am really excited to be here moderating. Sarah Rubin is the Chief Outreach Officer. Yes, thank you. Wave when I call your name so folks know who you are. Is the Chief Outreach and Engagement Advisor at the California Department of Conservation. Prior to joining the department in June 2018, she was the Public Engagement Program Director at the Institute for Local Government. Specializing in public engagement, she has extensive expertise working with local governments and stakeholder groups throughout California. Rubin is a national leader in the public engagement field with deep understanding of cities, counties, special districts, and state departments. She is experienced in a wide range of policy and regulatory issues, as well as rural, urban, and suburban communities. Rubin prides herself on being results-oriented and an expert building customized approaches to challenging technical, relational, and cross-cultural issues. National involvement includes the Council of Advisors, National Civic League, the Steering Committee of the Divided Communities Project at the Ohio State Law School. Within her home state of California, she helped to found the Sacramento Region Emerging IAP2 chapter and sits on the Institute for Local Government's Public Engagement Panel of Advisors. Rubin has her MS in Conflict Analysis and Resolution from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. She is also an accomplished community mediator and has led conflict resolution centers in Sacramento, California, and Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Along with her husband and 2 daughters, she lives with a dog, a cat, and a potty-trained rabbit. Kristen McKinley. Kristen McKinley is the Environmental Enforcement Manager with the Office of the Secretary at Cal EPA. She is responsible for supporting the Deputy Secretary for Law Enforcement and General Counsel in implementing Cal EPA's enforcement strategy and for leading Cal EPA's Environmental Justice Task Force efforts through coordinating the compliance and enforcement work of Cal EPA's boards, departments, and office in areas of California that are burdened by multiple sources of pollution and are disproportionately vulnerable to its effects. Todd Sachs. Todd Sachs is the chief of the Environmental Division at the California Air Resources Board, where he oversees enforcement work of 180 staff on all of CARB's programs. He has a doctorate in environmental science and engineering, 25 years of experience in the environmental field in the public and private sector. Florence Gharibian. Florence worked with the US EPA for 12 years, initially as a student intern in the technology library at the US EPA National Field Investigations Center, Denver, Colorado.
Was there
And as a technical information specialist, US EPA Region 9, San Francisco, California. In 1981, she accepted an assignment with the California Department of Health Services Hazardous Waste Program, where she served as the director of the Office of Public Participation and Information. She developed and conducted public participation programs for several Superfund sites in California. In 1985, she accepted a position as an inspector in the California Hazardous Waste Program's Los Angeles office. In 1996, she was appointed to serve as the Enforcement Program Branch Chief, Los Angeles region. In her last 3 years in the Department of Toxic Substances Control, she was asked to be the Environmental Justice Program Coordinator for the department. After her retirement in 2011, she continued to work with the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network. Currently, she is the chair of the Del Amo Action Committee. Last but most certainly not least, Robina Suwol and California Safe Schools. Founded by Robina Suwol in 1998, California Safe Schools is Children's Environmental Health and Environmental Justice Coalition. CSS achieved national prominence by spearheading the Los Angeles Unified Integrated Pest Management Policy, the IPM, the most stringent pesticide policy in the nation for K through 12 public schools, and the first to embrace the precautionary principle and right to know. The success of the policy led to California Health Schools Act. Today, the LA Unified IPM policy serves as an international model for school districts and communities. On October 6, 2005, Governor Schwarzenegger signed AB 405, sponsored by California Safe Schools. The bill bans experimental pesticides whose health effects are unknown from California K-12 public schools. As a result, more than 6 million California children and hundreds of thousands of school children are protected from experimental chemicals whose health effects are unknown. California Safe Schools continues to be a leader on children's environmental health with an emphasis on schools and environmental justice communities. Under Robina's leadership, California Safe Schools has facilitated changes at the policy level as well as at the grassroots, which creates a lasting institutional protection. So I'm sure you can all see now why I am so impressed by these folks and excited to hear what they have to say. We're going to start with Sarah Rubin to talk about engagement and how we can think about it differently.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So nice to be here with you. I have a couple ideas, points I want to share, and also a few tips that I'm hoping you all will consider implementing. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of slightly big picture, the basics around public engagement. A lot of people really will confuse outreach versus engagement. And you may or may not be surprised to hear that a lot of government folks will talk to me about how they want to engage the public. But when I ask about their goals and what they want to do, really, they want to inform and hope people like what they want to have happen. They don't really want to engage. So what I'm suggesting is that all of us think about our goals and where we do want to engage, and the importance of authentic engagement. So if this idea of kind of what's outreach or engagement isn't super familiar to you, I'm going to suggest that you check out something called the IAP2 spectrum of engagement. IAP2 is the International Association of Public Participation. So the way different people, like planners have the American Planning Association, facilitation or public engagement people have IAP2. And Natalie has just dropped a link into the image for that. For those of you who are advocates, if you're working with government folks who don't seem to get the difference between outreach and engagement, I would love it if you would tell them, there are materials out there that can help you understand this and maybe even point them to it. The other thing that folks might not be aware of is that IAP2 has local chapters. There's a really active Southern California one. I help lead the Sacramento region one. There's Bay Area, there's Orange County, and all of them you can participate in for free. So if you're advocate folks, if you're working with any city, county, regional, state government people who don't really seem to be as informed about authentic engagement as you would hope, that'd be one place where you could point them to for resources. Okay, the second thing that I want to push on is the necessity of authentic engagement. Check the box engagement, it will not do. And I hope I see a lot of nodding heads here. This kind of decide and defend approach, it doesn't work. It isn't useful. And the more that we can be thinking about connecting with people in an authentic way, the more successful that we're going to be in connecting with community and moving forward. So my kind of practical tip here is that all of us, certainly who are working in engagement related to government, that we have two lists. I always have two lists going. So my first list I always have is kind of key stakeholder folks from all different aspects of the community that I have a relationship with and that I need to maintain a relationship. So list one is important network folks who you know. List two is like, where are you weak within your network? What parts of the community do you maybe not have the greatest of contacts or connections? And what can you be doing to improve those connections? So like, for example, I have been thinking about how in the Central Valley, I'm weak on connections with people in the Vietnamese community. So that's something that's now on my list of things to work on. So if you're somebody who kind of isn't sure where to start, or you wouldn't know how to assess what's missing, I'm going to have another link dropped into the chat. The Institute for Local Government, where Crystal and I used to work, there's a number of templates that are free to use that could help get you started. And one is called the Community Landscape. So if you need a way to get started, that would be one great way to start. Another kind of tip I'm going to suggest if you're looking for contacts to help you strengthen your network so that you can be talking with folks in community about how they want to be engaged with and what works for them, is when you look at local community-based organizations or nonprofits, take a look on their website on who's on their board. Looking at board members can be a great way for you to figure out who informal or formal community leaders are in a given community. And for those of you who are in the advocate community who feel frustrated about maybe the quality or the depth of outreach that folks within government are doing around important issues, take a little bit of time to really push or encourage them to work on their network. Maybe if you can introduce them to people, remind them that you want to make sure they know who the demographics in the given target community are, and are they thinking all of that through? We've got interpretation today. Language access should always be a baseline piece of what you're thinking about, not an add-on. And then the final thing that I want to touch on has to do with what I'm going to call managing up, or maybe managing laterally. And kind of what I'm getting at here is, for those of us who work in government, there can be a lot of fear within leadership. So for some folks, you know, being out in community, talking with community members, government leaders can worry about all the different worst case scenarios. That it's almost like a mindset thing. What's the worst thing that could happen? So as somebody who's seeking to do authentic engagement, I want to really encourage you to take the time to think through all the reasons that approaching your effort from like this authentic relationship built way is worth it, and think through all the things that are going to come back at you. Is like, but what if this happens? What if that happens? So that you have some strong answers. And remember to articulate what happens if we don't engage at this level. What are the risks we face if we don't pursue this in a way that's authentic and sincere? And then for those of you in the advocate community, anything that you can be doing maybe in a kind of candid way to help those who work in government around engagement, think about what those key messages might be to help folks have that strong argument is really going to bolster the effort. So those were my kind of 3 big things that I wanted you all to be thinking about when it comes to this work, which is so important in our communities. 1, remember the difference between outreach and engagement. 2, know that there's all kinds of resources available for you. And if you aren't working on your relationships, you really will be nowhere. And then 3, and finally, think about that kind of mitigating for all the people who will say, this is too risky, or this is too kind of innovative. Let's do something that's a little more conservative. All right, Jessica, that is it for me.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And that was a really good start for where we're headed with this, and hopefully gets everybody in the right mindset and thinking about being brave and doing things that maybe a lot of us haven't done before, and how to get across those lines. A reminder to everybody here in the audience, please think about questions. We are trying to save time at the end for questions so that we can do exactly what we're talking about and engage and have a conversation. So I'm going to turn now to Kristen McKinley to talk about capacity building in regulatory agencies.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. And before I get started, I'd really like to extend my appreciation to the LAEJ Network for the invitation to really.
I just clicked on it.
Okay, I'm making sure I could hear some background, so I thought that something was going wrong there, but it looks like we're good. So I would like to start by really talking about building collaboration capacity internally within Cal EPA, what we're doing to build collaboration capacity between and with other agencies, and then with communities. So Cal EPA's boards and departments have worked over the years to expand our enforcement capabilities to assist with community concerns. And we really are continuing to strive to implement a robust, equitable, and forward-leaning enforcement program. We know that a key element to achieving our goal is increased collaboration. And this means increasing collaboration, as I said before, internally, between and with other regulatory agencies, as well as with communities. In February of 2020, Secretary Blumenfeld issued an environmental enforcement memo to all of Cal EPA's staff. And this memo really set forth the basic elements of a proactive state environmental enforcement program and a framework for us to strengthen our coordination. A number of the elements within this memo focus on collaboration. And I'm hoping that you guys will see that this is dropped in.
This is the interpreter. I'm very sorry to interrupt. Please slow down. Thank you.
Not a problem. Absolutely. So there should be a link for you guys. And there's certain elements in this memo that focus on coordination. And those ones include multimedia and cross-program enforcement, state and federal enforcement partners, tribal enforcement partners, enforcement program and integration, and then equity and enforcement. Collaboration capacity is really the ability for us to work cooperatively with others in a variety of contexts. And this can include collective sharing, learning, creative thinking, problem solving, and decision making. So we know that building collaboration capacity internally within Cal EPA is critical. The process of breaking down silos and building bridges across various programs or our divisions is really critical to achieving meaningful outcomes, especially in vulnerable communities. So for example, a strong enforcement and compliance program really requires coordination between permitting, policy, and enforcement to assure that our priorities are in alignment. Program functions such as rulemaking and permitting must be carried out with thoughtful consideration for how new rule requirements and permit decisions can actually be monitored and enforced. So this really requires, right, collective sharing and ongoing communication between enforcement and program staff to really ensure that new rules or permits that are being developed actually achieve their intended purpose and result in tangible outcomes, such as pollution reduction. In addition, rulemaking and permitting must include outreach and meaningful engagement, like Sarah just mentioned, right, to relevant stakeholders and community members. It's really important that we have this open dialogue back and forth to really understand what the concerns and the needs of the community are. It takes us really working together, having open-mindedness, clear communication, and building trust amongst each other. And in regards to building collaboration capacity outside of the agency, we know that we need to build strong partnerships and also to strategically target our resources to address the most pressing environmental enforcement and compliance issues. We know that environmental issues impacting disadvantaged communities are often complex, and they require coordination across multiple agencies. Cal EPA has a statutory obligation to ensure that the boards, departments, offices, and other agencies that implement laws or regulations within the jurisdiction of Cal EPA take consistent, effective, and coordinated compliance and enforcement actions to protect public health and the environment. We also know that enforcement is not a tool to solve all problems. However, enforcement inspectors can identify ways to help address issues impacting vulnerable communities. Through enforcement, we can listen to community concerns and ensure that pollutant sources in these communities are compliant with local, state, and federal laws. And sometimes community concerns, right, can be addressed through enforcement because they're driven by non-compliance. And in other circumstances, even if the pollution sources are brought into compliance, there can still be significant cumulative impacts and community concerns that remain unresolved. And in instances like these, we can partner, though, with other regulatory agencies and community advocacy groups to share, learn, and think creatively about different ways of problem solving and how we can work together to engage the appropriate decision makers. I'd like to share two main ways that Cal EPA is bolstering collaboration and strengthening partnerships with regulatory and community stakeholders to facilitate cross-media enforcement efforts. First, I'd like to highlight the work of Cal EPA's Environmental Justice Task Force, and second, the Cal EPA US EPA Region 9 MOU. So the Cal EPA Task Force was formed in 2013, and it's comprised of Cal EPA and its boards and departments, as well as regulatory agencies at the local, state, and federal level that implement and enforce environmental laws in California. The task force's mission is to facilitate the use of environmental justice considerations in compliance and enforcement programs, and to enhance communications with community members to maximize benefits in disproportionately impacted areas. And over the years, the task force has had 3 primary goals. The first goal is to promote interagency coordination to ensure that pollution burdens in disadvantaged communities from multiple sources are effectively addressed. And the second is to create opportunities for residents in disadvantaged communities to provide input regarding local environmental problems. And then the third is to integrate the input that community residents provide into our environmental inspections and enforcement work. And so the task force really strives to address environmental injustice by focusing our enforcement actions where it's needed most, and by working collaboratively to ensure the highest possible compliance rate across local, state, and federal programs. And by doing both, we aim to create a level playing field across industry so violators don't profit from non-compliance, and to protect vulnerable communities. Previous work for the task force has occurred throughout the state and in specific geographic areas. But in 2019, Cali, PA decided to shift the emphasis of the task force from a geographic focus to an emphasis on key sectors that have raised environmental justice concerns over the years. 4 sectors have been prioritized, which include worker protection standards, compost, oil and gas, and then metal shredders. And for each of these sectors and the initiatives, we're working with communities that are impacted by the sector, along with appropriate local, state, and federal agencies that have regulatory authority over the sector. And I'd like to briefly highlight for you all the importance of each of these sectors and the goal of the effort. So the first is ensuring compliance with worker protection standards is critical. Farm workers are essential workers. They're central to a safe, bountiful, and nourishing food supply. Yet economic disadvantage, immigration status, and linguistic isolation makes farm workers some of the most vulnerable workers in the American workforce. And for this reason, coupled with the health risk that's posed by pesticide exposures, strong enforcement and strict compliance with worker protection standards was prioritized. And so far, the Worker Protection Standard EJ Task Force initiative has focused in Riverside County and is currently active in Imperial County. This effort, it really aims to identify field worker concerns, to ensure compliance with worker protection standard requirements, to promote collaboration by working with community groups to conduct field worker interviews, conducting joint agency inspections, and providing education and outreach to farm workers and farm labor contractors.
Kristen, I'm going to give you a heads up. You're right around 10 minutes.
Okay, I will just briefly go over the other ones. And the last thing, maybe I won't go into specifics so we don't hold things up, but I did want to touch on the Cali, PA EJ MOU. So perhaps I'll jump there just to mention it. And if there's more questions about the task force, we can come back to that. But we did enter into a memorandum of understanding between Cali, PA and US EPA. And it's really the first of its kind that we've done. It's a 5-year MOU, and we're really looking to partner to enhance our collaboration and our enforcement and compliance in overburdened communities. And so we're trying to build upon really the existing collaborations that we already have and plan to increase our joint inspections with them, sharing knowledge for developing metrics for determining pollution burdens, and really thinking of how we can promote coordination on our enforcement responses, including joint judicial enforcement actions. And then a big portion of it is to expand our engagement with overburdened communities to ensure that we're really understanding and being informed by the knowledge and the lived experiences of people in the communities so that we can do the best that we can. And we're hoping to improve transparency by collaborating on an annual work plan and putting out an annual report that'll highlight those achievements. And just so to wrap it up, really the goal of all this work that we're doing is really to work together with US EPA, with also CalEP's boards and departments, the local regulatory agencies and community members to foster resource sharing, improve transparency, build relationships, and to really be more accountable and responsive to compliance concerns in overburdened communities. So thank you. I'll pass it off to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Kristen. So now we're going to turn to Florence Gharibian. And I'd like to just start off with, Florence also was a panel member at the last, on the last panel, and she made a comment that I think tees off where we're asking Florence to talk about today. And she said, we have to build capacity to work with EJ communities. And so that's really been, I think I've heard something like that from Florence a lot. But before we dig into that, Florence, I'd like to ask you to share some background regarding the origins of environmental justice. You're on mute, Florence.
Please forgive me for that technical difficulty. The first, I would like to, when I did EJ meetings, when I worked at DTSC, I like to start with the quote. And for what I'd like to say today, I want to quote Cynthia Babbage when she said, I just want to work with people who are honest with me. And that seems like a very straightforward and easily achieved goal, but it isn't always. I want to also tell a little story that's based on environmental justice about a site that I'm deeply concerned about, which is a scrap metal yard, I say located in the parking lot of Jordan High School. We had a case with that company when I was at DTSC in the early 2000s timeframe. We filed a case with the California Supreme Court regarding this, and I attended an enforcement task force meeting where I talked about what we were doing. And when I'd finished describing what we were working on, one of the men in the meeting, with a great deal of arrogance, said, why did they build a high school right next to a scrap metal yard? And I was able to tell him that the high school was built in 1926 and the scrap metal yard was there much later, probably during World War II. So the judgments that you might make working with people, please be cautious with those judgments because they're not really always fair. I'd like to talk about two studies that are milestones in identifying environmental justice. The reports were authored by the church-based civil rights group in the United Church of Christ in 1987 and 2007. The reports focus on the correlation between hazardous waste facilities and racial groups in the United States. The first report found that race was by far the most significant variable for determining the location of hazardous waste facilities and communities with the largest number of racial and ethnic minorities. It also described the risk for exposure by risk to minority groups in general. The report concluded that Los Angeles contained more Hispanics living in communities with contaminated properties than any other metropolitan area. The report made policy recommendations. Number one, the president should issue an executive order requiring federal agencies to consider environmental justice in their work. Two, EPA should form an Office of Hazardous Waste and Racial and Ethnic Affairs. State government should make revisions to the hazardous waste permitting process. I might say that again. State government should make revisions to the hazardous waste permitting process, which is something DTSC is working very hard on right now. A quote I like from the report: "We embrace God's transforming mission to do justice, seek peace, and build community." President Clinton did sign an executive order on February 11th, 1994. 20 years later, after the release of the Toxics and Race report, it concluded that disparities persist in the distribution of the nation's commercial hazardous waste facilities. Although current assessment uses newer methods and a better match with people and hazardous waste facilities, the conclusions are very much the same as they were in 1987. I also want to point out that Los Angeles County has more hazardous waste generators than any other area of California. Actually, significantly over 50% of California's hazardous waste generators are in LA County.
Now I had the mute problem. Thank you, Florence. So this is an environmental enforcement conference. Could you give us your view of the role of environmental enforcement programs have in environmental justice communities?
I can tell you that I think environmental enforcement plays a major role in improving disadvantaged communities. And I believe that that effort can be expanded and being even more effective. I'd like to talk about two examples of enforcement stepping in and really making a difference in the community where the actions were taken. When I was at DTSC, we did a series of bus tours. And the first bus tour we did was in Los Angeles. As part of that tour, we went to El Monte to hear the community's concerns about a company called Greg Industries in El Monte. As a result of that, the DTSC did inspections at the facility. While our DTSC inspectors were there, a forklift drove across the parking lot and dumped a huge bag of baghouse dust in a dumpster, resulting in our inspectors running for cover. After that, I contacted Joe Liu. He was a member of the board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and explained to him what had happened. He asked the Air District to send out inspectors to the facility where they found major air violations. The latest thing I read about this online before I did this presentation is that the Air District and Greg Industries did ultimately reach a settlement with a $4,170,000 penalty. What's happening there right now? A vacant lot with a sign on a chain link fence announcing that the property is for sale. I call that a happy ending in that situation. The other thing that the LAEJ network worked very hard on is complaints from people living in Paramount, very close to a series of metal plating shops that were using hexavalent chromium. Now, the Air District, at some point, things clicked into go for those complaints those people had for a long time before they were able to get an agency to really take action. But when the South Coast worked on it, it was a major undertaking, reviewing, doing air monitoring, determining which of the companies had the highest hex chrome releases, having enforcement cases, And as a result of that work, brought those levels down very, very low. It was a very major project for the South Coast and a very successful project. What I argue is that we need to take in enforcement, citizen complaints need to be taken seriously, and the right amount of people power, the right amount of listening, the right amount of fact finding needs to go in the work that gets done to respond to citizen complaints. When I worked at DTSC, the federal government gave us funding for our enforcement program, but it did not include responding to citizen complaints. In other words, we were not paid by the federal RCRA program for doing that work. And I think that was unfortunate because the program tended to work hard to accomplish those things that the US EPA RCRA program wanted them to accomplish. So citizen complaints are very important. People who live in these communities really do understand where the problems are and what the help is that they need to have. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. So we're running up on our 10 minutes, but I still want to ask you though, Florence, for an example of a time when your organization did work that didn't result in achieving what you hoped it would achieve. How did you respond?
We have two examples of the hard work that the Del Amo Action Committee has done for 26 years. The people in that community have worked to get the best things they could get done for the Montrose and Del Amo Superfund sites, which are their neighbors. And what we have seen EPA do is give permission for two major warehouses in our community over the last 3 years. The first one on Normandy Boulevard, no public notice, no notification, dig a big hole across the whole former Farmer Brothers plant property, which is right adjacent, right next door to Montrose, and then pile up hills of cement and use a cement grinder to grind that material and have dust from that activity going all over the community. The second example is another warehouse in our small community at Torrance and Normandy. And the US EPA signed a prospective purchasers agreement with a company to build a warehouse on a property contaminated with DDT and identified as an operating unit of the Montrose chemical plant. Now I will tell you, communication that the federal EPA is at an all-time low, and it seems very clear to me that they're doing this process of let's not and say we did. So those are my two examples, Jessica.
How do you keep going?
We keep going because we've got plenty of work to do. And in fact, just recently, the Del Amo Action Committee completed a health survey in our community. And it was a tremendous project, very difficult. And I am so proud of the work that was done on that project.
Thank you, Florence. Now I'm going to turn to Todd, who's going to talk about enforcement plans and implementing component. So Todd, lots of agencies have a new focus on environmental enforcement in EJ communities. You know, since 1987, when we had our first study, we've got those now. What are CARB's efforts to work with EJ communities?
Well, first off, thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'll start from CARB's perspective with my experience in enforcement. So when I first came to enforcement 6 years ago, we had one staff person who was particularly passionate about environmental justice and in particular putting up no idling signs in the community, in many different communities. So we worked to build off that, and we started by soliciting volunteers in the division to to periodically attend local community meetings and task forces in an effort to better understand and address community needs. When AB 617 was adopted a few years ago, we took several actions. First, we worked to make sure that enforcement was part of the community air protection blueprint, because at a minimum, it's important to ensure that sources operating in these communities comply with air quality and environmental regulations. And second, we formed a section of staff within the enforcement division at CARB whose job is to work with individual communities, and in particular AB 617 communities, to focus enforcement efforts. And so this group helps conduct outreach and conducts enforcement efforts and conducts enforcement directly. So today in every AB 617 community, we develop enforcement plans, and we do implement them, and we report back. You're muted. Sorry.
Gosh, no, thank you. I was muting because there was some noise background. Thank you. How important is the implementation component of EJ enforcement plans? What has been your experience in doing this?
I think it's really important. We've worked primarily through the air districts to develop and implement enforcement plans in every AB 617 community. I can say from my perspective, this hasn't worked out exactly the way I thought it would. I was at least envisioning more direct contact and collaboration with communities than what we ended up getting in AB 617 enforcement plans. And I think that was because the steering committees are so busy working with the air districts, trying to develop community emission reduction programs in a very short amount of time, that's led to enforcement plans being developed with less input than I think would have been useful for us to really understand and be responsive to community concerns. And at the Air Resources Board, our enforcement goal is to ensure compliance in every program we enforce, to ensure the emissions and health benefits of our regulations are actually achieved. And because we want to ensure compliance starting in the communities that are most impacted by those sources, we really have evolved our enforcement programs to focus our efforts in disadvantaged communities. So for the past 15 years, CARB developed and implemented rules that were designed to dramatically reduce diesel particulate emissions from trucks and other diesel powered equipment by 90% or more. And ensuring these requirements are met is the most important thing we can do from an air toxics perspective to improve conditions in disadvantaged communities. And over the past 4 years, the fraction of California registered vehicles complying with our regulations has increased from 66% in 2016 to 98% today. So we know our rules are working, and we're continuing to go after the remaining trucks that don't meet our requirements. And we've built many partnerships to do that. And I definitely would like to point out Jessica Brown and her team, who are actively supporting us in that effort. So to date, AB 617 has really resulted in our bringing our existing enforcement programs into disadvantaged communities across the state. And so for example, in 2020, we inspected more than 13,000 vehicles and marine vessels, with 73% of them in disadvantaged communities. And we diverted $6.8 million to supplemental environmental projects that provide high efficiency air filtration to students in schools and other benefits directly to disadvantaged communities. And in fact, we've diverted more than $20 million in penalties since we redesigned our SEP program several years ago. So from a statistical perspective, our programs have been really successful. But as SERPs started being presented to the board, and SERPs are the community emission reduction plans, we started hearing a lot of dissatisfaction from communities who were not happy about enforcement and the plans that had been developed. And this surprised me and got me trying to think about, like, what actually are we actually focused on the issues that communities care about, and what is CARB enforcement really for? So we are changing our approach based on lessons we've learned over the past few years.
So what should implementation for these plans look like?
Well, I think, we've been successful going into communities and then doing something and leaving. But I think to really be successful, we're going to need to build stronger and more longer lasting partnerships with communities so that that facilitates more effective enforcement over time. And over the past several years, I don't think we've always addressed community concerns, even if we've gone out and tried to ensure compliance with CARB requirements. So with that in mind, we're going to expand our enforcement approach based on 3 fundamental ideas. First, we're going to work with communities across the state to better prioritize our work where it is most needed. So rather than simply bringing our programs into a community, we want to instead bring our expertise and our labor and ask people in the community how they think we might be used to address problems they see in the community. So we're going to try to address community issues rather than trying to ensure compliance with our programs. Enforcement is going to be a large part of what we do, but it's not going to be the only thing that we do. So we're going to be providing a more comprehensive suite of services to communities. And this would include our regular work like mobile source inspections, vehicle idling assessments, and the like. But for example, we are now engaged in several odor investigations in communities across the state. We can conduct inspections of industrial facilities in collaboration with Air District staff. We can provide training to community members on many different issues, but one would be helping to submit actionable complaints. But training is really a two-way street. We have a lot to learn from community members in terms of how to better work with them. So there's an element of training where the community members would essentially be training us. We can help collaborate, especially with Cal EPA and our boards and departments on multimedia issues. We can help build supplemental environmental projects that are specific to a particular community concern that can help address things that traditional enforcement can't. So third and finally, we really want to focus on transparency, accountability, and leveraging what we've learned from our work. So going forward, we're going to provide a report to once we've developed an enforcement plan in the community, we are going to report back first to the community and then eventually to our board. All of our results from our inspections, including the new types of inspections we're developing, will also be posted into our online enforcement data visualization system, which shows the results of all of our inspections. So we're starting to implement this approach now.
And how flexible, or do plans have to have any flexibility or the capacity to course correct?
They really do need to have the capacity to course correct. I think part of the problem for us has been that maybe our communication with community groups hasn't been sufficient for us to understand when a course correction is necessary. So at least our hope is, I think that we're going to be trying to work more directly with community groups so that we have an opportunity to understand when a course correction is necessary, because we have the communication in place to and hopefully a trusting enough relationship for people to tell us when we're doing something, when we need to do something differently. And that's going to really require ongoing collaboration and teamwork in different communities, and it will need to be flexible as issues arise.
So you've talked about a lot of community engagement in a new way. What is that going to look like?
Well, we are experimenting with ways sort of going beyond just engaging communities the way we've done before, and we have a long ways to go. We do have several examples. For example, we've worked closely with the Comité Civico del Valle in Brawley. That really started with the Cal EPA initiative that Kristen had mentioned in her talk, but it eventually went beyond that. So we conducted mobile source inspections in the community. We deployed our emissions monitoring system called PEAKS, which is used to measure and screen large numbers of trucks to identify high emitters. And ultimately, all of this work resulted in 8 cases and $130,000 in penalties to fleets operating in that area. And at the same time, the community was concerned about industrial sources in the area. And while the local air districts have primary authority over stationary sources, so we conducted inspections with them. We identified non-compliance in some of the facilities. We referred that to the air district, and the district resolved them. We also entered into an agreement with the Air District to take steps to improve their permitting program, something which benefits everyone. It benefits the districts because their programs are improved. It benefits the industrial sources themselves because then they have a stronger understanding through their permits of what they need to do to comply. And it benefits the community because clearer and more enforceable permits are more easily complied with. So we're currently planning follow-up work and working to build a more lasting collaboration with the community going forward. And in one other example I'll mention, we've been working to investigate odor complaints in a community called Avenel in the San Joaquin Valley. And in this case, we've been partnering with state and local agencies, local advocates, and the community to try to identify and address odor sources in the community. We recently held a meeting in the community to discuss progress. And in this case, we have two challenges. The first is identifying the sources of the odor. And the second is really finding ways to build bridges with the community that had been working with local agencies and came to CARB. Actually, the way I heard about this issue was that community members came to CARB in an open comment period in our board to express concerns about an odor in this one town in the San Joaquin Valley. So when a community comes to CARB out of frustration, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to build some basic level of trust so that they understand that we're serious and that we're aligned with them in trying to solve the community's issue. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, okay. So we're running up on our time, but I still want to follow up with you on what CARB is learning. You talked a little bit about what CARB is learning from AB 617, but how is it informing your work going forward?
Well, I think through AB 617, we've learned that CARB's concept of enforcement and the community's concepts of enforcement are maybe a little bit different. At CARB, as a government agency, we're focused on ensuring compliance in our programs. But community members want issues in their community understood, highlighted, and ultimately addressed. Some of that can be done through what CARB enforcement would typically do, and some of it is broader. And like Kristen said, enforcement is not a tool to solve all problems, but we can, through the process of enforcement, also bring data collection techniques and help highlight issues. We can use enforcement to help ensure compliance while also identifying ways to start to address community priorities in the near term and to better understand underlying causes for community issues that are priorities that need to be resolved as soon as possible.
Thank you, Todd. This is exciting stuff because as somebody in enforcement, I've always been saying to people, I'm reactive. It's all I can do is react, but it sounds like you're really looking at your agency's role in a whole new way. So thank you for sharing that. It's great stuff. Can't wait to see how it all works out.
Oh, you're welcome.
Rubina. So Rubina, I'm going to turn to Rubina to round out the panelist discussion before we get to questions and talk to us about relationship building and the keys to success.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good, thank you. Well, when I began this work 23 years ago, there was no handbook to guide me. But I made a commitment that moving forward, if my efforts were successful, that I would pay it forward and I would share any lessons learned. And so I'm just going to start at the beginning. They changed 23 years ago. As I was dropping my sons off at Los Angeles School when an unfortunate accident occurred. A school gardener wearing a hazardous materials suit working near the entrance to the school steps sprayed pesticides on a group of students entering the school. And one of the students was my 6-year-old son, Nicholas, who suffered a severe asthma attack as a result. Fortunately, he recovered. I had no litigious motives, but he wanted to know, is it going to happen again? And really not knowing how things would happen going forward, I just said, of course not, Nicholas, of course not. And so from that day forward, I committed to keeping my promise. And the incident led to the formation of California Safe Schools. And 1 year to the date that Nicholas became ill, Los Angeles Unified School District, second largest in the nation, which spans 28 cities, 704 square miles with more than 1,000 sites, created the most stringent pesticide policy in the nation for schools. Jessica shared that, and in embracing the precautionary principle and right to know, what was very unique about it is there's a 15-member oversight committee that, among other members, includes parents and community members and environmentalists, and of course, district staff. And we've met for more than 23 years at this point, and through extensive work and broad-based training, for more than 2 decades, the Los Angeles Unified School District has not used Roundup or glyphosate, any form of that, on any school campuses. And it uses exclusion and strict sanitation guidelines to limit any kind of applications of chemicals for pests and weeds. And only heat is used for termite treatments. A lot of people don't know that, so I wanted to share that. The success of the LA Unified Policy led to California legislation, the Healthy Schools Act. And I think there are going to be some links that are placed in the chat box that will be shared with you on some of the policies and programs that I'm mentioning. Today, the LA Unified Policy has become a national and international model for school districts and communities. And throughout this entirely unexpected journey, I learned many lessons. I learned to focus on the outcomes, not obstacles. I've learned that if you're lucky, that working on an issue may end up being a 50-yard dash, but it's also critical to be fully prepared for a marathon. First impressions are extremely important, and honesty is imperative. If you lie or stretch the truth, your credibility is over, and it is really impossible to bring it back. Communication is a two-way street. It's not one way, and listening is critical for both sides. And that trust takes time and effort. And that's why all communication must be truthful and transparent. For the community members, it's really critical for you to do your homework surrounding the jurisdiction of each regulatory and enforcement agency and learn their limitations. Locating the proper agency, of course, can be very challenging, but California Safe Schools has tried to help, and we've worked with the South Coast Air Quality Management District on a who to call guide that is really diverse. It's not just about air issues, it's an environmental issue that you want to report or find out more information. It's currently being updated on their website soon. It's also important to note that there are times when certain agencies are involved in legal matters where they cannot disclose information about their investigations. And it's important to understand their restrictions. And for agencies, it's important to understand that members of the public may request to file complaints anonymously because of the possibility of retaliation. And I've had and seen this happen so often and unjustly. For example, with teachers who have complained and suddenly they're being reassigned or worse, or for parents whose children who receive special needs services suddenly being denied, or having social services sent to their home for no reason. So please understand, for the public, be prepared when reporting a violation or asking for help. Provide a time, a location, and an issue clearly and as concisely as possible. If incidents are ongoing, please record them in writing and maintain a copy for your records. And document calls made with the name of the individuals you spoke to, and try and memorialize phone conversations, especially conversations that have an agreement, that committed agreement. And because there can always be personnel changes, and sometimes very abruptly, make sure that you keep copies. And if you're going on a meeting, try and bring someone with you. For government staff, please recognize that members of the public know their communities and they can be the eyes and ears. Go to their communities, attend their events, learn the true voices of the community. They can be allies and offer help and support. And working together with mutual respect can result in a much stronger outcome in a much shorter time frame. And please don't be fooled by groups or individuals who parachute in, who are not from the community, who claim to be speaking on behalf of the community. The members of the communities that we work with and that I know are extremely capable of speaking for themselves. And also recognize that many community activists are volunteering. They're not being paid for their time or expenses. And they have their own work and they're taking care of their families. And so please be respectful of their time. And the last really here is that allies can appear in the most unlikely places. In 2005, a researcher came to the LA Unified Oversight Committee wanting to use LA Unified to test experimental products. And the team unanimously said, no, thank you. And as she was leaving, she said, oh, that's okay. If LA Unified doesn't want to use them, I have plenty of other school districts lined up, and I'm already using Ventura County schools. Well, that comment really horrified me, but right after the meeting, I went to another meeting. It was a family meeting with folks in Sylmar who were doing a health fair. And this is about never knowing who's in your room. And I got there and they asked me where I came from, and I told them the story. And when we were finished helping with the health fair, a young man came up to me and he said, can I please speak to you? I heard your story, and I'm the deputy for Assembly Member Cindy Montanez, and she would like to carry a bill to prevent this from happening again. So that's how AB 405 happened. And, you know, you just never know. And so what I would like to end by saying is, what I've found is that you must have hope, that you have to believe in your dreams. You have to surround yourself with people of integrity. You have to work hard. And you have to be open to unexpected allies and never, ever, ever give up on efforts to protect human health and the environment. So thank you for allowing me to speak to you today.
Thank you, Rubina, and thank you to everyone. So we have some time left. This is scheduled to go till 5, and I'd like to invite people in the audience to ask questions. You can raise your hand or put them in the chat. And I'm hoping that Stephanie will help keep an eye on some of that for me. While we're waiting for folks to ask those questions, one of the things that occurs to me is not everybody has a Robina or a Florence like those of us here on this panel do. So how should the government best reach out to folks in the community? And this is open to anybody on the panel. Anybody? I'll call on folks.
I'll take it as a start, I
Go ahead,
guess.
Todd. Go ahead, Todd.
No, what I would say is CARB has a number of different ways that you can reach out to the agency. We have an environmental justice unit that operates pretty independently within CARB that Crystal and Natalie, who are on this call, are both part of. And that group is sort of our frontline outreach to communities. We also have a section in enforcement that I could get a community person in touch with if you're interested, or you could contact with me directly.
Great.
So I don't know, Sarah, if you had anything to add.
Well, I just wanted to double check. Jessica, I'm sorry, were you saying how can people get in touch with us at our state agencies, or how do we suggest somebody at a state agency connect with people in a given community?
I had both questions, and I think Todd got one of them, but if you want to answer the other side of it, that would be great.
Well, I'll reiterate something I said earlier, which is if you're starting from scratch, if you take a look at a community's demographics, that'll give you a place to start. And then you can look for the community-based organizations just by doing a Google search. And then from there, you can contact those executive directors. You can look at who's on their board. And I think the big thing is you just have to be willing to pick up the phone. A lot of people don't want to talk on the phone anymore. People need to talk on the phone. You have to dial phone numbers and cold call people and say, I'm Sarah Rubin. I'm looking to connect with people in your community. And if you are the kind of person who gets nervous, make a few talking points for yourself. Have 3 open-ended questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. I see we have a hand raised. Ken Sutu, did I get that right? Go ahead and unmute yourself so you can ask the question. Or maybe Natalie can help me.
Can I ask you to unmute yourself, but you actually have to be the one to do it on your end. Do you see a little icon there at the bottom?
So at the bottom left of your screen, Ken, there's a little microphone. If you click on it. No? Okay. Do you want to try typing it in the chat? While we're trying to get Ken unmuted, does anybody else have a question?
Jessica,
Yeah.
I wonder if I could add to the answer to the question by saying that,
Of course.
beyond a shadow of a doubt, there are silent communities in California. And it's very likely those communities have the same level of problems as anybody else. And that's where a proactive effort is just so important. But on the other side of the coin, and this is something I say reluctantly after years of experience, the squeaky wheel really does get the grease. And that's kind of a painful reality, but I believe that it's true.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think you make a good follow-on point there to what we've been chatting about. Hoping, Ken, we're going to get you unmuted there.
Jessica,
No.
Ken
Yeah.
did put a comment in the chat.
Great,
so I
thank
could
you.
maybe read that and that would be helpful.
That'd be fabulous. Thank you.
So Ken wrote that the problem Fee Koons mentioned is a problem happened in many communities. Says we need a solution for odor problem. We were told that odor problem is a difficult problem 6 years ago. Where are we now? Ken, was that the
if it
question you were
helps-
asking?
Yeah, I think that makes
Okay.
sense because Faye Koons was asking about the H25 problem from the Dominguez channel.
Yeah, so I mentioned in the chat, I don't know the specifics of what's happening on the Dominguez channel other than that the air district is heavily involved. But to answer Ken's question about the odor problem in communities, we get a lot of complaints about odors in different communities, and the districts do all the time. I think there's several different problems that are endemic to that. One is that there isn't really a clear, first of all, there's no real, different districts will have different requirements, but really what governs odors is a public nuisance. And nuisance is a arcane part of the law that is sometimes difficult to enforce. And different districts and CARB also have different ways of trying to figure out what a nuisance actually is and how to prove it. So it's difficult. It's something we're increasingly engaged in. In fact, part of the reason why I was in LA today was to meet with researchers at UCLA who are working on odor issues and trying to find ways to better investigate and use techniques to identify sources of odors. So it's something that's front and center on CARB's list of concerns because it's coming up in so many different communities in so many different ways. But the legal structures behind it are old and a little bit convoluted and difficult to enforce on. So there are probably legislative solutions that are needed there as well.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to touch on those issues?
Jessica, I'd just like to add it, a little bit there on following up on this. I know, Todd, you mentioned that Faye could reach out and we would be more than happy to kind of follow up. I'd also, Faye, like to extend that. I don't have all the answers to this specific issue right now. I do know that various agencies have been following up on it. But I would like to dig in more to it and be able to connect with you after this. So if there's a good way to be able to connect with you, I'm going to drop my email and my phone number into the chat. And I'd encourage you to call me directly and we can talk more about it. And I can reach out to the various agencies and be able to provide you with some follow-up feedback. So.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that. So one of the things I'm hearing as I listen to everybody talk is we have folks like Robina and Florence who have been doing this for a very long time. And some of our agencies with new programs and new ideas about how to achieve better capacity building with EJ communities. How do we ensure that the work underway will get us where we need to be?
I think that there has to be a will to do better. I think that we all, I think when we all can work together cooperatively, that great things can and do happen. But again, there has to be the will. And I know that everybody that's on this call today from the community who I've met with, and for everyone on this panel that I've had really the honor of working with, that you're very communicative about, you respond quickly, that you're very authentic. And I just hope that as things move forward, we can continue to have that in the agencies and the communities as well.
Anybody else want to touch on that?
Yeah, I wanted to specifically mention the Lamo pits. And Cindy Babbitt, she's still with that issue. And my kid was like probably 5 or 6, Hazel. She's now 30. That issue about cleaning up the Lamo pits has been there since the 90s, I think. So, but Cindy never gave up on it. You know, Robina wasn't even involved there. Myself and I think Triana Silton and the cleanup, and there were like 3 or 4 corporations that, you know, it was a horrible issue. And she's still at it, you know. I think a lot of, quote unquote, the women lead most of the protest action because we are concerned about the children. And if you look at the chat, you know, what's happening with the Mingus channel. That's why, I don't know, nobody from Cal EPA or CARB, you know, answered me, but that issue is that it's unbearable. I attended the media conference, and the moment Jesse Marquez was facing, and I was facing because I was going to write about it, and the smell really hit me. And so for like days, my migraine is still here. I still have the, you know, migraine. And they don't know whether it's from the refineries. You know, AQMD kept saying, okay, we're monitoring data, LA County. It's taking too long. Imagine the poor people who have asthma, you know, and they kept saying, well, you gotta dredge it. Whether you monitor or not, you have to dredge the channel. You don't know what's in it. We used to clean up the LA River. I don't know what's happening now. We never do that, you know.
No, Faye, and absolutely, this is a big issue, and I think we all understand. I think you might have got dropped when both Todd and Kristen were saying that neither of them had the capacity to answer you today because they didn't have details, but you'll find Kristen's email in the chat, and you can follow up with Kristen, and she can try to help get better answers for you.
But my point is, you know, when it concerns, my point is this is exactly what we've been dealing with, you know. And this is not just justice, this is racism, you know. Racism because people of color in the 60s, they dump all they built, you know, they created landfills, and it made, you've never seen this in Orange County or Beverly Hills. There are no refineries. So what I'm saying is it is environmental racism. Thank you.
Finally, I got unmuted.
And actually, the thing to do is on the participant, okay, unmute myself from the participant side instead of on the lower icon. Okay, I have a okay, this is a Ken Sutu from Citizen Air Monitoring Network. I'm actually from Vallejo, so it's Northern California. But I think that the question I mentioned is the most basic the thing which apply to every community, which is, okay, basically from the community's point of view, I mean, we have two major category of complaint. One is the PM, and the other one is the odor, okay? But when we look at the PM complaint, the current way of doing the compliance is through opacity, which is totally does not work, okay? I mean, opacity, I don't know how much you know about that, but it's like we complain something and you send out, probably not you personal, but say the way with the current protocol is send out an inspector and look at if there is opacity problem or to what level, which is totally, I mean, I don't know what to say. It is totally does not work or does not protect the community with the PM pollution. Okay, we need a different way of handling that. So that is the first thing. The second thing, thank you, Todd, for answering the odor. I think just like Fee mentioned, odor is I mean, I know many community has that problem, and we just report, okay, there is, I think from the state level, we need to develop a protocol. I mean, maybe you need some kind of equipment or something. We're not going to be able to provide to every community, but I assume we should be able to have a set of things or a team which we can actually, the first thing is to find out what the odor is. Just like Fee mentioned, like we in the community, we just smell something bad, but we don't even know what we are smelling. And currently, for example, when we talk with our air district, they offer us so-called smell training. I mean, that's totally doesn't, I mean, why do you want me to smell something and tell you? I mean, it could be poisonous. And so that
Ken,
totally does, yes.
Thank you so much. We are at our time limit, and I know somebody's about to lose their ability to stay. One of our panelists is about to, it's going to have to say goodbye. And sadly, it's probably the one who could have answered your issues best. Does anybody want to take a crack at giving a quick answer on that? Because we are past 5 o'clock and I'm going to lose all my credibility as a moderator if I let this
It's
run
okay.
too much longer.
I'll answer really quickly, but then I have to go because I'm being kicked out of the office. I'm the visiting office I'm in. But Ken, you mentioned opacity. We actually train inspectors across the state on how to read smoke. And yes, it is an arcane technology, if it's even a technology, but it is useful. It is not the only source of PM control on many different types of permitted pieces of equipment. But it is a good backstop as a requirement in many stationary source permits across the state, whether in South Coast or in Bay Area or other places. There are potentially ways it could be improved, and I'd be happy to talk with you about that offline. I put my email address in the chat. If you would like to email me, I'd be happy to have more of a conversation on it. But thank you all. I really have to go.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
Thank you to all of our panelists. Sorry I didn't keep us on time as well as I should have, but you are all so fabulous and have such great things to say. I'm honored to be a part of this group and just want to thank you for the time and energy, not just for today, but that you always put into this, and for keeping us all on the train moving forward. So Rubina.
Hi, thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much. Thank you to our sponsors, to all of the attendees. Thank you so much. To our phenomenal moderator and panelists, Jessica Brown, Todd Sachs, Kristen McKinley, Sarah Rubin, and Florence Gharibian. And to our exceptional translators, Leah and Nicola, And also a giant thank you to Natalie and Crystal from the California Air Resources Board, who have been our technical experts. Our next panel is coming up on December 15th. The title is Environmental Justice and Enforcement and Community Stories. So in the meantime, stay safe and well, and thank you all for being here today. Thank you. Good night.